During the reunion picnic, my aunt mocked, "You're the branch we should have pruned years ago." Laughter echoed. I'd organized the permits, so I revoked them mid-event, bringing officials to shut it down and scatter the crowd. I, 32M, got my revenge on my aunt during our family reunion. The sun was brutal that Saturday afternoon, the kind of heat that made asphalt shimmer and turned cars into ovens. I stood at the edge of Riverside Park, clipboard in hand, watching my extended family trickle in for our annual reunion picnic. Coolers scraped against concrete, kids shrieked near the playground, and the smell of charcoal starter fluid cut through the thick air. I'd spent 3 months organizing this event. Permits, pavilion reservations, coordinating with the parks department. Nobody knew I was the one who'd done it all. They just showed up expecting everything to work. My aunt arrived fashionably late, as always. She swept in wearing oversized sunglasses and a white linen outfit that screamed she'd never actually planned to sit on the grass. Her husband trailed behind hauling a massive cooler, their 2 teenage kids already glued to their phones. She surveyed the setup with the critical eye of someone who'd contributed nothing but felt entitled to judge everything. The pavilion looked good. I'd secured the largest one in the park, the one with the ceiling fans and proximity to the bathrooms. Tables were arranged in a wide U shape, covered with checkered tablecloths my mom had insisted on. A banner reading, "The Family Reunion 2025, hung slightly crooked between 2 posts. My younger brother was manning the grill, smoke billowing up in thick clouds as he struggled with the charcoal. Cousins I barely recognized were already breaking into the snack table, and someone's portable speaker was blasting classic rock way too loud for a public park. I'd always been the black sheep. The one who didn't finish college the traditional way, who chose a different career path, who married outside our cultural background. My wife wasn't here today. She'd taken our daughter to visit her parents, probably the smarter choice in retrospect. The family tolerated me, included me in group texts and holiday dinners, but there was always this undercurrent of disappointment. I wasn't successful enough, traditional enough, connected enough. I existed on the periphery of their approval. My aunt had always been the ringleader of that sentiment. She was my father's older sister, the self-appointed matriarch after my grandmother passed. She had money, connections, and that particular brand of cruelty that came wrapped in concern. Over the years, she'd made countless comments about my choices, my career, my lifestyle. Always with a smile, always in front of others, always designed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. The afternoon rolled on. People ate. Kids played kickball in the open field, and the adults clustered in groups, rehashing the same stories they told every year. I floated between conversations, making sure the ice didn't run out, that the trash bags got changed, that the younger kids didn't wander too far toward the river. The invisible labor that nobody notices until it stops happening. Around 4 o'clock, my aunt decided it was time for her annual speech. She clinked a fork against her wine glass. Real glass, not plastic like everyone else's, and waited for the crowd to quiet down. People gathered closer, kids were called back from the playground, and someone mercifully turned down the music. She stood at the head of the main table, surveying her domain with a satisfied smile. She started with the usual pleasantries, thanking everyone for coming, making jokes about how the family kept growing. She mentioned my uncle who'd passed 2 years ago, got a little misty, then pivoted to celebrating the successes within the family. She rattled off achievements. My cousin who'd just made partner at his law firm, another cousin's daughter who'd gotten into an Ivy League school, my brother's recent promotion. The list went on, each name followed by applause and proud murmurs. Then she paused, took a sip of her wine, and her eyes found me in the crowd. My stomach tightened. I knew that look. She launched into a metaphor about family trees, about strong branches and weak ones, about growth and pruning. Her voice took on that saccharine quality she used when she wanted to sound profound. She talked about how families needed to cultivate their strongest members, how resources should flow toward those who would bear the most fruit. People nodded along, not quite catching where she was going. Then she said it. She looked directly at me and smiled, that razor-sharp smile that never reached her eyes, and announced that every family tree had branches that should have been pruned years ago. Deadwood that took up space and resources without contributing anything meaningful. She didn't say my name, didn't need to. Her gaze made it crystal clear. A few people gasped, but more laughed, nervous, uncertain laughter that rippled through the crowd. My brother looked away. My mother's face went pale. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, but nobody said anything. Nobody ever did. The moment crystallized into something sharp and permanent in my chest. Not sadness, I was past that. This was clarity. Pure, cold clarity about exactly how much I meant to these people, about how easily they'd laugh at my expense to avoid confronting her. I stood there, feeling 50 pairs of eyes either on me or deliberately looking away, and something fundamental shifted. My aunt continued her speech, moved on to other topics, but I wasn't listening anymore. I pulled out my phone and opened my email app. 3 months ago, I'd applied for the pavilion permit under my name. I'd coordinated with the parks department, paid the fees, signed all the forms. I'd done it because nobody else would, because I still had this stupid hope that maybe if I contributed, if I made things easier, I'd finally earn a spot at the table instead of under it. The permit confirmation email was still in my inbox. Below it was the contact information for the park services coordinator I'd worked with, a woman who'd been incredibly helpful throughout the planning process. I'd called her twice about extending our reservation, about arranging for extra trash pickup, about a dozen small details that made today possible. I stepped away from the pavilion, walked toward the parking lot where the noise faded to a dull roar. My hands were steady as I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, sounded surprised to hear from me on a Saturday. I explained the situation calmly. I was the permit holder for the Riverside Park Pavilion reservation, and I needed to revoke it immediately. There was a pause, confusion in her voice as she asked if everything was okay. I told her everything was fine. I just needed to cancel the permit effective immediately. She explained that technically I could do that, but there were people currently using the space. I knew that. I told her. I was one of them. I asked if she could send someone to enforce the cancellation, to clear the pavilion since we no longer had authorization to be there. Another pause, longer this time. She asked if I was sure, mentioned that it would be disruptive, that there were children present. I was very sure, I said. I understood the implications. She said she'd send a park ranger within 20 minutes. I thanked her and hung up. The walk back to the pavilion felt surreal, like moving through water. Everything looked the same. My brother still at the grill flipping burgers, kids still playing, adults still clustering in their comfortable groups. My aunt was holding court with the older relatives, probably still basking in the aftermath of her little performance. Nobody noticed I'd been gone. Nobody noticed I'd come back. I didn't rejoin any groups. I stood near the edge of the pavilion, checking my phone, waiting. My heart was hammering, but my mind felt eerily calm. There was no internal debate, no second-guessing. Just this quiet certainty that I was done being the family punching bag, done performing invisible labor for people who saw me as disposable. 18 minutes later, a white truck with the Parks Department logo pulled into the parking lot. A ranger stepped out, clipboard in hand, accompanied by what looked like a supervisor. They scanned the area, spotted me near the pavilion entrance, and headed over. I walked out to meet them halfway, away from the crowd. The ranger confirmed my identity, checked my driver's license against the permit records on his tablet. His supervisor explained they were here to enforce the permit cancellation I'd requested. I nodded, confirmed that was correct. The ranger looked uncomfortable, glanced at the families and kids and mountains of food behind me. He asked one more time if I was certain about this. I told him. The permit was in my name, and I was revoking it. They exchanged a look, then squared their shoulders and walked toward the pavilion. I followed a few steps behind, watching everything unfold in slow motion. The ranger approached the main table where my aunt was still talking, raised his voice to be heard over the crowd noise. He announced that the pavilion permit had been revoked and everyone needed to vacate the premises immediately. Confusion rippled through the gathering. People stopped mid-conversation, kids froze with snacks halfway to their mouths. My brother turned away from the grill, spatula dangling from his hand. My aunt's face was a study in disbelief. She demanded to know what he was talking about, who he was, what authority he had. The ranger remained calm, explained that the permit holder had canceled the reservation and they no longer had authorization to occupy this space. She sputtered something about having reserved this months ago, about this being a family gathering, about the absurdity of shutting them down. The supervisor stepped forward and asked who had made the original reservation. My aunt looked around, suddenly uncertain. She'd assumed someone had handled it. Maybe my mother, maybe one of the organizing cousins. Several people pulled out phones, checking emails and group texts for confirmation. Nobody could produce a permit number. Nobody had any documentation. That's when my mother's eyes found mine across the pavilion. Understanding dawned on her face, followed immediately by panic. She started to say something, but I shook my head slightly. The ranger asked again about the permit holder, and I stepped forward. I explained that I'd secured the permit, handled all the arrangements, paid all the fees, and I was now revoking that permit and asking them to clear the space. The silence that fell over the pavilion was absolute. Even the kids stopped making noise, sensing something significant was happening. My aunt turned to me, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and then pure rage. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing, whether I'd lost my mind. How dare I ruin a family gathering over some petty grudge? Her voice climbed higher with each accusation, drawing attention from other park visitors who'd stopped to watch the commotion. I didn't raise my voice. I told her I was simply pruning a dead branch, removing something that was taking up space, without contributing anything meaningful. Her own words, delivered back with the same smile she'd given me an hour earlier. The ranger interrupted before she could respond, stated that they needed everyone to pack up and leave within 15 minutes or they'd issue citations for trespassing. The supervisor added that any remaining items after that deadline would be confiscated. Then they stood there, arms crossed, making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. Chaos erupted. People scrambled for coolers, kids were yanked away from games, food was hastily packed or abandoned. The grill got knocked over in the rush, sending hot coals scattering across the concrete until someone doused them with a cooler of ice. My aunt was still trying to argue with the rangers, but they weren't engaging. My mother was crying, which sent guilt lancing through my chest until I remembered sitting there while people laughed at my expense, and she'd said nothing. Cousins shot me looks ranging from confusion to anger to something that might have been respect. My brother came over, asked what the hell I was thinking. I told him I was thinking I was done being treated like garbage by people who expected me to keep showing up and taking it. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked away to help pack up his grill. The pavilion emptied in record time. Families scattered to their cars, arms loaded with half-packed coolers and folded chairs. The banner came down, leaving behind only the holes where the zip ties had held it up. Plates of food were dumped into trash bags, drinks abandoned on tables. Someone's kid was crying because they hadn't finished playing. An elderly relative needed help carrying their stuff, and for a moment nobody moved to assist until finally one of my younger cousins stepped up. My aunt stood near her car, arms crossed, staring daggers at me across the parking lot. Her husband was loading their cooler, moving quickly like he wanted to be anywhere else. Their kids looked mortified, probably already crafting the story they'd tell their friends about their crazy extended family. Within 20 minutes, the pavilion was empty except for scattered napkins and the lingering smell of charcoal. The rangers did a final sweep, picked up some forgotten items, then left with a nod in my direction. I stayed behind, walking through the space I'd reserved, the party I'd planned, the disaster I'd created. My phone started buzzing. Texts flooded in, angry messages from cousins, a heartbroken ramble from my mother, radio silence from my brother. My aunt sent a single message calling me every name she could think of, ending with a promise that I was dead to her and the rest of the family. I read them all without responding, then put my phone on silent. The drive home was quiet. I stopped at a red light and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked the same as I had that morning, but something fundamental had changed. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the need for approval, the hope that maybe this time they'd see me differently, was gone. Replaced by something lighter and scarier, the understanding that I'd just blown up my relationship with my entire extended family. Update 1. I didn't sleep much that night. My wife came home around 9 with our daughter, who was still buzzing with excitement about her day with her grandparents. I waited until after bedtime to tell my wife what happened. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to something like vindication. She'd been encouraging me for years to set boundaries with my family, to stop volunteering for things when I got nothing but criticism in return. She didn't say I told you so, but I could see it in her eyes. The messages continued through the night and into Sunday morning. My mother called 7 times before I finally answered. She was oscillating between tears and anger, asking how I could do this to the family. To her, didn't I understand how humiliating this was for everyone? I let her talk herself out, then asked if she remembered what my aunt had said to me, if she'd noticed how people laughed. She went quiet, then said my aunt sometimes spoke without thinking, that she didn't mean anything by it, that I was too sensitive. That word, sensitive. Like it was a character flaw to expect basic respect from people who claimed to love me. I told my mother I wasn't interested in being part of a family that saw me as a punchline, that I'd spent years trying to earn a seat at a table I was never going to be invited to. She cried harder, said I was tearing the family apart. I pointed out that the family had been treating me like an outsider long before yesterday. I'd just finally stopped pretending everything was fine. She hung up on me. My brother texted asking if I was happy now, if this was worth destroying family relationships over. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? That yes, actually, there was something satisfying about watching them scramble, about making visible all the invisible work I'd been doing. That felt too honest, too raw. Monday brought consequences. My aunt had apparently spent all of Sunday calling other family members, crafting a narrative where I'd sabotaged a wholesome family gathering because I couldn't take a joke. Several cousins who'd been friendly toward me before sent messages saying I'd gone too far, that my aunt's comment hadn't been that serious, that I'd ruined the day for kids and elderly relatives who had nothing to do with our conflict. The group text for family events that I'd been part of for years went silent. Then I realized I'd been removed. My father called Tuesday evening. He'd been traveling for work and missed the reunion. Came home to my mother's tearful account and a phone full of messages from relatives. He asked me to explain my side. Actually listened while I walked him through everything. The months of planning nobody acknowledged, my aunt's speech, the laughter, the decision I'd made in that moment. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he told me he understood why I did it, but I'd chosen the nuclear option when there might have been other paths. He asked if I'd considered confronting my aunt directly, or leaving the event, or having a family meeting afterward to address the disrespect. I had considered those things, I told him. For years, I'd swallowed comments, walked away from arguments, tried to be the bigger person, and it never changed anything. At least this way, everyone knew exactly where I stood. He sighed, said he couldn't defend what I'd done, but he couldn't entirely condemn it either. My aunt had always been harsh with me, he admitted, and he should have said something years ago. We talked for another hour, the most honest conversation we'd had in maybe a decade. He didn't promise to fix anything, didn't ask me to apologize, just said he loved me and wished things were different. Work was a relief that week. Nobody there knew about my family drama, and the familiar routine of meetings and deadlines felt blessedly normal. But coming home meant confronting what I'd done. My wife was supportive, but even she seemed uncertain about what came next. Our daughter asked why Grandma sounded sad on the phone, why we weren't going to see cousins soon. I told her sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that take time to work out, which felt like a massive understatement. Update 2. 3 weeks have passed. The initial flood of angry messages has slowed to occasional pointed texts from relatives I barely knew, usually some variation of how disappointed they are in me. I've blocked my aunt entirely. Her messages had escalated from angry to genuinely nasty, and I didn't need that toxicity in my life. The family fractured in interesting ways. My younger brother remained angry, sided firmly with my aunt's version of events where I'm an unstable person who overreacted to a harmless joke. 2 of my cousins, ones who'd been on the receiving end of my aunt's criticism over the years, reached out privately to say they understood why I did it, even if they couldn't publicly support me. One admitted she'd always admired that I organized these events, but hated how the family took it for granted. My mother has stopped calling daily, which feels like progress and loss simultaneously. We've texted a few times, surface-level stuff about my daughter and the weather. She's not ready to acknowledge that the family dynamic was broken long before I shattered it, and I'm not interested in pretending everything was fine until I ruined it. My father has become an unexpected bridge. He started having individual conversations with family members, not defending my actions, but pointing out that maybe we should examine why someone would be driven to do something so drastic. Apparently, this has not made him popular. My aunt accused him of taking my side, choosing me over her. He told her he was choosing honesty over comfort, which caused its own explosion. The most unexpected outcome has been the clarity. For years, I'd felt obligated to maintain these relationships simply because we shared DNA. Now that they've been severed, at least temporarily, I can see how much energy I was spending on people who fundamentally didn't value me. The mental space that's opened up feels both liberating and lonely. My wife pointed out that I'd been performing a version of myself around my extended family, always trying to be helpful enough, successful enough, traditional enough to earn acceptance I was never going to get. She's not wrong. I'd been so focused on fixing my place in their hierarchy that I'd never questioned whether I wanted to be in that hierarchy at all. There's been no talk of Christmas plans yet, but that's looming on the horizon. Traditionally, my aunt hosts at her house, a massive production where everyone's expected to show up, bring assigned dishes, and participate in her orchestrated version of family togetherness. I've already decided I'm not going, regardless of whether I'm invited. My wife and I are planning to start our own traditions with our daughter, something smaller and more genuine. Some relatives have tried to position themselves as mediators, suggesting that both my aunt and I should apologize and move forward. But I'm not interested in that false equivalence. Apologizing would mean accepting that my response was disproportionate to years of accumulated disrespect, that I should have continued absorbing her cruelty indefinitely. I'm done with that narrative. My aunt hasn't apologized. Multiple people have told me she feels she did nothing wrong, that her comment was meant as motivation to do better, that I'm ungrateful for everything the family has done for me. That last part is particularly rich, considering I can't think of a single instance where the extended family materially helped me with anything. I wasn't the one taking from the family tree. I was just done being treated like I was. The truth is, I don't regret what I did. Maybe that makes me petty or vindictive. But watching that pavilion empty out, seeing the consequences of my invisible labor suddenly become very visible, there was a satisfaction in that I can't deny. For once, my family had to confront what they'd taken for granted. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to smooth things over or make excuses. Would I do it again? Probably not. There were collateral casualties, kids who didn't get to finish playing, elderly relatives who got caught in the chaos. That weighs on me. But would I go back to being the family doormat, organizing events for people who saw me as disposable? Absolutely not. I've started therapy, which feels overdue. My therapist has been helping me work through this weird combination of guilt and vindication, unpacking decades of family dynamics that I'd accepted as normal. She's pointed out that my response, while dramatic, was fundamentally about asserting boundaries that should have been respected all along. My daughter asked again about the family yesterday. She misses her cousins, the chaos of big gatherings. That guilt cuts deeper than anything my relatives have said. I'm trying to figure out how to maintain some connections for her sake, while protecting both of us from the toxic patterns that define my relationship with these people. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, and maybe they shouldn't be. But some might just need new foundations, ones built on mutual respect instead of obligation and guilt. Time will tell which is which. For now, I'm focusing on the family I've built, my wife, my daughter, the life we've created outside the shadow of my aunt's judgment. That's where my energy belongs. That's the tree I want to cultivate, not one where I'm constantly being reminded I'm deadwood worth pruning. The annual reunion will happen next year. Someone else will have to organize it, secure the permits, coordinate with the parks department. I wonder if they'll appreciate how much work it actually was, or if it'll just seem easy because they've never had to do it before. Either way, it won't be my problem. I pruned myself from that branch. And honestly, the view is better from here. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.